So with my next guest, I could probably do a 12 episode series on all the expertise that he has, all the every part of the organization that he touches, his vast experience. I've been spending a couple of days doing a deep dive on his materials and learning so much. I've read hundreds of books. And it's so nice and refreshing to dive into somebody's work and get even more pointers every time you touch on a different subject. Officially, Cameron Herold is the founder of the COO Alliance and Invest in Your Leadership course. He's the author of Vivid Vision, a remarkable tool for aligning your business around a shared vision of the future. A client of mine just went through that, changed everything about his business, and it was an incredible resource for him. And the other book, which we'll be talking about, is The Second in Command, Unleash the Power of Your COO. Cameron is a dynamic consultant who has coached some of the biggest names in the business. He's known as the CEO Whisperer. Cameron has a reputation for guiding his clients to double their profits and revenue in just 3 years or less. So we want to listen to Cameron today. Cameron's entrepreneurship journey began at a young age, and by 35, he had helped build the first of $200 million companies. So again, someone who's been there and done that, not just written the book. I love that. His greatest achievement, according to him, is being the COO of 1-800-GOT-JUNK, where he engineered the company's spectacular growth from 2 million to 106 million in revenue in 6 years. The current publisher of Forbes magazine, Rich Karlgaard, and if I said that wrong, sorry, Rich, stated that Cameron Herold is the best speaker I've ever heard. He hits grand slams, and I've been watching video after video, and I agree with that. When he's not on stage, Cameron continues to teach through his Second in Command podcast and his best-selling books. He's the top lecturer at EO and Entrepreneurs Organization and MIT's Entrepreneurial Masters Program. That was a lot, Cameron. I cut a whole bunch of stuff out.
Yeah, of course. Thank you, Rich or Mark. Appreciate it.
It was,
And
yeah,
you did say Rich's name correctly.
I was hoping so. Sometimes I just interviewed someone who was from the Middle East, and I practiced his name 30 times before I got on, so I wouldn't screw it up for him. But thank you
Of
for
course.
being here. You've been all over the world, and you've been creating second in commands like nobody's business. I've heard of your work well before I even became a coach. So you've touched you touched so many people's lives. I'm curious because we had a friend of mine, Lori Aaron, on the show a little while back, and she wrote the book "Who Has Your Back: A Leader's Guide to Getting the Support You Need from the Chief of Staff You Deserve." And she talked about the difference between a chief of staff, a COO, and an administrative assistant. And at first blush, most people think they know the difference, but then we try and shoehorn people into these other jobs. I'd love your take on that.
Well, and the problem is that most people are using or often using that title interchangeably when they're completely different roles. And it's almost the same as saying that, a husband is the mom and the mom is the husband, when no, they're both parents, they're both parenting children, but one's a guy, one's a woman, they're different. And the chief of staff title started actually in government, where the chief of staff's role was to be the executive administrator for the chief of the country. Essentially, it started really as the president of the United States had a chief of staff, and then it migrated into other roles. And the chief of staff's role was to control the calendar, communication, and often strategic communication externally and internally for their CEO or for that person. But there was no operational oversight in terms of the business or the day-to-day. So they controlled the calendar, communication. What happened when it brought into the corporate world, in the Fortune 500 world, the Fortune 100 world, is you ended up getting these very large company CEOs that had a COO. They had multiple executive assistants, but they had the chief of staff that, again, controlled their calendar, communication, and often some of the project management for them. What's happened now is we've had that title kind of migrate into other parts of the business because it's fancy, and because entrepreneurs tend to like to, in the last 25 years, give away big titles. So what happened around 1994 was we started to give away equity in lieu of compensation. So in the rise of the first dot-com era from 94 to 2000, entrepreneurial companies gave away equity instead of a big salary package. When the internet crashed in March of 2000 through the fall of 2000, nobody wanted equity anymore. They now wanted to get paid and maybe they still wanted some stock options, but they needed a bigger pay. And so we started to give them other things. And because the internet was there, a title became a marketing tool. So the banks were the first ones to give away VP titles. And then all of a
Right.
sudden, internet companies started giving away VP titles. And then through 2008, from about 2000 through 2008, we saw the almost title inflation happen with C levels, where now everybody became a chief marketing officer, chief technology officer, chief information officer, chief HR officer, et cetera, to the point that even over the last few years, we've now got the head of sales is now a chief revenue officer. So we've had title inflation and we've had title migration. So the chief of staff, which used to be reserved for politics or for big C-level and big corporates, started to migrate down into the entrepreneurial world. And then you've got the executive assistant, which is there someone to really, handle the administrivia, handle some of the minor works, handle some of the minimum wage jobs that end up on an executive's plate. But that tends to be my viewpoint for what that the chief of staff title is. And then the reason I even called my book The Second in Command, and the reason I run the Second in Command podcast, is many second in commands to the CEO have different titles. Some are the COO. Some might be a president, or they could be a VP of operations. Some even carry like a CFO or a CTO title, but they're
Mhm.
the second in command. They're the one who, if the CEO is in hospital for 6 months, they would step up and become the leader of that organization, or they're really that yin and yang counterpart to the CEO.
So in other words, like, so I work with one CEO. He doesn't have a COO. He has a president. But
Correct.
when I look at what the president actually does in the company, it's a lot of the COO's responsibilities. So it's
Exactly. And that's why I called the book The Second in Command. And even for my COO Alliance, which is the large network of second in commands, if I was to retitle it today, I started it 7 years ago. If I was going to give it a new title, I'd probably call it The Second in Command something.
mhm.
Because we have many members that are the second in command of their CEO, but they carry the president or another title. In fact, I had a woman today say, I can't join the CEO Alliance because I'm not the second in command, I'm the president. I'm like, well, you're second in command of the CEO. And she goes, yeah, I guess so. She just never really thought of it as a different title.
It's interesting because yeah, I do believe that you created a whole genre of leadership conversation with your alliance. So because that's
But
actually the first I heard of it was because of you.
it's interesting. 7 years ago, there was an article in the actual magazine of Fortune magazine, and they talked about the rise of the COO group. And because we were starting the COO Alliance, I was mentioned in there. The COO Alliance was mentioned in there, and Sheryl Sandberg, who was the second in command at Facebook, was referenced in that article as well as being kind of that rise of the COO title, and then the support group, because there were so many groups for entrepreneurs
Hmm.
like YPO and Vistage and EO and like tons of groups for, and then there were also groups for marketers and engineers and lawyers, et cetera, but there was no real organization for that second in command role.
So today we're going to be talking about leading your team. But
Mm.
before we get there, I'm still fascinated your take on what does it take to become a second in command, trusted advisor type person. What do you see are the traits that make a good team?
Well, so we were talking about like the team with the CEO is really the first is the ability to actually confront the brutal facts and tell the CEO what no one else is willing to tell them. I was speaking with a COO this morning about that, and they said they're nervous about talking to their CEO, but they know they need to. I said, trust me, if you go and tell the CEO what's really happening when no one else is willing to, they're going to trust you more than they've ever trusted anybody else, because you do it in a way that it's good for the company, it's good for the core values, it's good for the culture, it's good for the vision that the CEO is driving towards. The key is to do it in a way that you don't harm their reputation. So you never give the brutal facts to the CEO in front of the rest of the team. You never do it in front of the board. You never tell the king they're naked in front of everybody else. You kind of pull them aside and you say, hey, Emperor, you're not wearing any clothes, right? This magical suit is actually you're naked. So you need to be able to do it and tell them, hey, I'm going to tell you something that's uncomfortable for me to say, but it's for the good of your vision or the good of your culture, the good of the core values. And then they're very receptive to hear. And they're also very thankful that you had the courage to do that. That's one way to become that trusted advisor. The second way is to really be clear on the vision and the culture that the CEO is driving towards, so that you know where they're going, where they really want to take the organization, and to make sure that they're clear on the plans of how you want to make that come true. almost like a general contractor who's going to build someone's dream home. You have to be very clear on what the homeowners want to build, and they have to be very clear on what the blueprints and plans look like so that they know that you're going to build what they want on schedule and on budget, and that you're clear that their dream home looks like what they want it to look like.
That makes perfect sense. In fact, you talk about making sure that everybody understands the vision of the company. Make it your business, that they eat, sleep, and breathe the vision of the company, the why of the company, all of that. Can you elaborate on that?
Yes. So what happens often is these entrepreneurs come into the company, let's say it's on Monday or Tuesday, and they're like, what the heck is going on in here? And they realize that people are working hard, but they're working in an unorganized fashion, or they're working on projects that just don't make sense to the entrepreneur. Well, the reason they don't make sense is because you've got a vision of where you want the organization to go, and people tend to be working on their best guess of where they think the organization is going. So if all you've given them is a one sentence vision statement and a series of goals, they're making it up as they go.
Mhm.
The concept that I constructed years ago that we've rolled out globally now in probably 25 or 26 countries is called a vivid vision. And the vivid vision is a 4 or 5 page written description of what your company looks like, acts like, and feels like 3 years in the future. And it describes every single aspect of your company. It describes every area of your org chart. It describes every intersection between customers in your company and employees in your company, suppliers and shareholders, so that everybody can see what your company looks like, almost as if you hopped into a time machine and you flew out to the future and you got out of your time machine and it was December 31st, 2027, and you walked around your company and you described what you saw. You're not sure how it happened, but you can describe every single aspect of it with clarity. That vivid vision document becomes an aligning force for all of your employees, for your leadership team, so that they can then figure out the plans to make it come true. And that allows the CEO to step to the side and allow the second in command, or the COO, and the leadership team to put the plans and the people and the execution in place to make the vision a reality.
Yeah, great. So what you say is train and certify everybody in the core values, the vision, the core purpose, the big hairy goals, and the history of the company and the why. Right. So you're making
Yeah, and
sure
that's kind of
everybody's
like, if we
growing in
think
that.
about Simon Sinek talks about his golden circle with the why, the how, and the what. Simon used to sleep on our couch and was on our board at 1-800-GOT-JUNK back in the day, way before he wrote his book. He was on our board of advisors at 1-800-GOT-JUNK. So we had a lot of time to get to know the concept.
You're like the Forrest Gump of business, because every time I watch a video of you, somebody slept on your couch or you helped someone get something. It's you
Well,
really.
no, we just happened to know. Simon flew out to Vancouver to meet Brian and I in 2004 after reading about us in Fortune Small Business and reading about our culture, and he wanted to see if it was true. So we had a lot of insights into the golden circles prior to them even becoming the book, Start With
Mhm.
Why. His idea of the start with why, and then the how, and then the what. The why is everything about your organization's core values, your culture, your core purpose, your BHAG, the history, kind of why you exist as an organization. And we need to train everybody in the organization so that they actually can see it and feel it. They get the whole DNA like the CEO does. And then most companies train people on what we do, right? We train them on how to do the job. We train them on the software, the day-to-day of doing whatever their job is. That's cool. What I obsess about is the inner ring, the middle ring, and that's the how we show up as leaders. So I train people on how to apply situational leadership, how to coach people, how to effectively lead and manage teams. And that's where most companies start bumping into their ceiling, and they can never scale past that $10 million mark, is because they don't end up with solid enough people who can scale the organization. And what they end up doing is building complexity, and they end up thinking that the answer to every problem is hire more people, and that's rarely the answer to the problem.
Yeah, you hire more people and it just adds more complexity. This
Right.
quote from you, I just love this. Gen Y and Gen Z are obsessed with career growth and leadership development. If you give them that, they will stay. If you don't grow them, they're out of there in 1 to 2 years. Uh,
Yeah.
and so let's talk about
Let me
this economy with the job market the way it is. I've been talking about it also, that if we don't do those skills that you're talking about, it used to be a nice to have. Now it's a necessity.
So there's a couple components to this. The first is that Gen Y and now even Gen Z, what they cared about most for years was working for a company that had purpose, right? That core purpose, the core values. There was a cause, there was seeing value in their work. That was very true. What happened was the baby boomer and Gen X parents started to influence their kids and saying, don't stay with a company for more than a year or two, move around and hop up and ladder up inside of, don't stay there for 10 years. So the only thing that's really keeping somebody in the organization now is if they're growing in their career.
Mm.
If they're growing in their skills and they're growing in their capacity and they're growing in their confidence and they're growing with their connections, they're going to stick with you because they see value in their work. They're working for good company cultures. Those are kind of like, those are basic starting points, right? You can't have a coffee shop and not play music. You can't have a great company and not have core values and core purpose and vision. But to keep people, they have to be able to grow, and that's growing their skills, growing their confidence, and growing their connections. So the more that you can invest in your leaders, it's even why I called my course Invest in Your Leaders. The more that you can invest in them, the more that they're going to stay because they can take on more responsibility. They can move up in the organization. But if they're not moving up in the organization with you, if they're not taking on more responsibility with you, they're going to hop to another company, either laterally for another 5 or 10 grand, or someone who maybe is a smaller company, but will give them a bigger title and more responsibility. They're going to start hopping around. They're not like the Gen X's who were there for 5 to 7 years. They're definitely not the baby boomers who were there for 7 to 15 years.
Right. So where do you start? So you're working with a leadership team and you want to give them this culture. Where do you start?
Mm. I really take a look at what the leaders kind of core role is. And a leader's job is to grow people and get results through people. So the best way to grow people and get results through people is to make sure that we first interview and bring the right people into the organization, right? You can't get results through a bunch of B's and C's. You need to get better at hiring A's and B's. So giving people the skill set around interviewing, around onboarding, and around the development of people, that's first. Second is kind of a basket of 4 skills that I think of almost together: situational leadership, coaching, one-on-one coaching meetings, right? That's your classic one-on-ones of managing somebody, and delegation. When a leader is really good at those 4 skills, they can actually develop people. They can give them more responsibility. They can give them more projects. Again, the leader's core job is to take a look at the to-do list. And the to-do list doesn't say, Mark's to-do list. It just says to-do list. Well, it should be to-do by other people list, because Mark's core job is to get everything on his list done, ideally by other people. If we can delegate everything off our plate except what we're amazing at, and we can work on growing the skills and the confidence and the connection of people so they can take on more and more capacity, that's what scales up our company. So what I like working with leaders on is growing those 4 skills first, and then layering in things like project management, time management, handling conflict, running meetings, etc. But it's the basket of those 4 skills that I really focus on first.
So what do you mean by situational leadership?
So situational leadership was developed by Dr. Paul Hersey and Ken Blanchard. Ken wrote the book, The 1 Minute Manager, and his situational leadership is the foundation of what the book, The 1 Minute Manager, is based on. It's also the #1 competency skill used by most of the global best organizations at their C-level and VP level. As an example, at Starbucks, I was being mentored by the COO at Starbucks for a period of 18 months. The C-level team and the top 50-ish people at Starbucks were trained in situational leadership every quarter, year after year after year. More and more training on that one skill. Situational leadership is the ability to adapt your style of leadership based on the project that the person is working on. So if I was leading you, as an example, Mark, and you had 10 different things on your plate, I might use a certain style for a couple projects, a different style of leadership for a couple more, a third style of leadership for 3 or 4 more projects, and a fourth style on a couple of others. If you are working on a specific project that's very new to you or you're very overwhelmed with, you actually need to be micromanaged on that. People think micromanaging is bad. Not if the person needs it. Remember, a 2-year-old pouring orange juice needs to be micromanaged on pouring orange juice, but that same human, when they're 20, don't need to be managed on pouring orange juice at all. They got it. In fact, when you start cheering on the 3-year-old going, good job pouring orange juice, that's what they need. It's not micromanaging. It's kind of the praise and the coaching and showing them how to do it a little bit better. But when they become teenagers, you're no longer cheering them on, nor are you micromanaging. You've adapted your style even on that specific project. So what I like to do is teach people a very entrepreneurial version of situational leadership, and it's how to adapt your style on a specific project based on the skill level and confidence level that the person that you're delegating it to has. And for any leader to get the maximum results through people, that's a core skill, because it comes into when you're delegating a project to them is knowing how much development, skill development you need before you let them go off and run with that project. If I'm handing a project to somebody who sucks at it, or they're overwhelmed, or they've got lots of competence, I delegate it to them in a different way. If I'm following up with them in the one-on-one coaching meetings we have weekly, the last thing that I want to be praising you at is something that you're amazing at, because you'd be like, dude, I'm operationally world class at this. Why you're patronizing me? But if it's something you've been struggling with, you absolutely need to be praised. Most leaders suck at leading because no one has ever given them the skills at it. And there's almost not an entrepreneur on the planet that has enough training on how to teach somebody to be a better situational leader or a better coach. And yet every manager has to coach people and lead people on a day-to-day. That's why my Invest in Your Leaders course is proving to be so valuable to companies, is it gives anyone who manages people the core skills to actually scale. That's one of the reasons why we grew 1-800-GOT-JUNK so quickly. I grew them from 2 million to 106 million in 6 years, was because we obsessed about growing the skill set and the capacity of our management team.
Besides being just a great idea in the first place.
Well, it wasn't even a great idea. There were 17,000 people already running junk businesses when Brian started. It
Mm,
wasn't a new idea. We merely branded the idea. But what we were able to do was scale it because we grew a culture. We grew
nice.
the PR flywheel, but it wasn't a new idea. There were already, again, 17,000 independent men with trucks.
Yeah, that makes sense. The first most of us in the public have heard of it was seeing those trucks though. So it was the branding. The branding was excellent. So I'm
Yeah.
curious. So you can't.
Well, and so here's what's interesting. I learned situational leadership at a company called College Pro Painters, which became the largest residential house painting company on the planet. So I left that company 4 years before I joined Brian. But College Pro Painters, even though it was the largest residential house painting company in the world, didn't invent house painting. There
Right.
were millions of people painting houses. They merely branded it. And then we had to go out and train 800 franchisees every year. And they had to train 8,000 painters in 1 month. So we became operationally world class at interviewing, recruiting, training, and the onboarding of talent, and then how to manage and deploy those people and reverse engineer goals. That's all the stuff that I try to bake into the Invest in Your Leaders course. And again, this isn't me pitching the course so much as saying, if a company wants to go from where you are to what your goal is, the number one thing you need to obsess about is growing the skills and the confidence and the connections of your people. If you grow their connections, like putting your COO into the CO Alliance, or getting them into some kind of a mastermind community, or sending them away to retreats so they can learn from others, they can connect with others and learn from others, and then they have the wisdom of the crowd instead of coming to you for every answer. If you grow their confidence, they can take on more
Mm.
responsibility. If you grow their skills, that grows their confidence, right? They ladder up in those areas. But most leaders try to hold people accountable and manage them instead of flipping the org chart upside down.
What do you? So I generally work with fast rising leaders, people who have been promoted, so quickly that those leadership skills have not been honed up into that point.
Mhm.
How can you
Yeah.
tell? How can you tell, or what can you share about the qualities you need to take on as you move from a contributor, from an expert to a leader?
Well,
And
this
how
is
do you know
where
if people are going to succeed or not?
Yeah, this is where a hypergrowth company needs to be really good at predicting the skill set of the talent of your bench 12 months in the future. So we need to be able to lean out into the future as a leadership team and look at, what does your org chart look like in 3 years? What's it look like in 2 years? What's it look like in 12 months? What's the scale of the organization in 2 years and in 12 months? What are the core projects that people are working on in 12 months? Where are the skill deficiencies of the people, right? And you need to be able to lean out and start building people on the skills before they need them. You need to be able to recruit people and have them onboarded and up to speed by the time you actually need them. Most people wake up in the morning, they're like, oh, I need to hire a director of marketing. guess what? You're 6 months too late. You should have been thinking about that director of marketing 6 months ago, hired them 4 months ago, onboarded them for 2 months, and got them up to speed so that the day you need them, they're already up to speed and on board and know already the part of the culture. But people tend to be bad at the planning and reverse engineering their goals. So they tend to kind of build the organization based on urgency and based on what they need. What I tend to do is I decide where I want to be. I don't forecast. I decide where I want to get to, and then I reverse engineer how to get there. In fact, when Brian and I were at the end of our first year of scaling 1-800-GOT-JUNK together, we went from 2 million to 6 million in that first year. We were asked by our lawyer one night, Andrew Sherman, we were sitting at the top of the Vancouver Hyatt, and he said, where do you want your company to be in revenue in 5 years? And Brian and I, without skipping a beat, both said 100 million. And we kind of looked at each other and where did that come from? Like, it was off the cuff, pulled out of our butt. Neither of us had ever said the number before. We both said 100 million and we cracked up laughing and we said, I guess that's the number. So then we reverse engineered it and we figured out everything we needed to do to get there, including the staffing, the recruiting, the talent, et cetera. We got to 106 million 5 years later. But if we were to forecast where we were going to get, we might have forecast 20 or 25 million. What we did is we decided, reverse engineered that, and that's how we decided how to grow the skills of our people. If we're going to double the company every year, we need to double the skills and double the confidence of our leadership team, or we better start recruiting early and bringing in the outside talent so that they can actually get onboarded and scale it, which we also ended up doing, right? We replaced all 5 members of the leadership team over the next 4.5 years, myself being the 5th of the 5 to get replaced.
How'd you learn all this?
I learned it at College Pro Painters, and then I also really
But
got
at
to
College Pro Painters, how did you learn? How, when you as a young man,
yeah,
in a growing business, how did you
Greg,
get the forethought
sure.
to
Greg Clark, who is the CEO of College Pro, was a part of the Young Presidents Organization. So he joined YPO at a very young age. And then he believed in growing his people, and he brought in different consultants every month to train us on different skills that we were going to need for the upcoming quarters. So we brought in trainers to train us around interviewing, to train us on conflict management, training us on situational leadership. Like, all of the skills that I teach are things that I had been trained in, read books in, watched videotapes in, practiced, role modeled, got critiqued by third parties on. We were groomed and trained in these skills like you would have been if you were a part of a Starbucks or a GE or an IBM or a Xerox. He just believed that the only way we could scale up an organization was to grow people. So I took those ideas at College Pro and I put them in place. And then I was already coaching entrepreneurs back in 1989. By 1993, which is the year that the International Federation of Coaches and Coach U started, I'd already coached 120 entrepreneurs by 1993. So, you think about coaching 120 people by the time I'm 28. I had practice at already working these skills, developing people in these skills, and then I was able to go off and build 2 other companies. I built a private currency organization, and then I ran the franchising group for what became the largest collision repair chain in the world, Gerber Auto Collision and Boyd Auto Body. So by practicing it, by using it, by teaching it, it just reinforced it. And then for me, I was also the dumb kid in school that I looked at the shortcuts and these systems as being the shortcuts, and I didn't let them get overcomplicated. I took the kind of entrepreneurial nuts and bolts of each system and ran with them.
So would you think it's fair to say that people who come into your orbit are already thinking this way, or already understanding that it's going to take a lot more work, a lot more planning, a lot more people time than they originally thought to grow the business the way they want to grow the business versus
Not not necessarily. I think the people that come into my orbit tend to be like the fly banging on the window, and they realize that there's got to be an easier path, and they know that if they keep banging their head on the window, they're going to end up dead on the windowsill, and they're just like, fuck, there's got to be an easier way. And so that they just want to go out that path. I think that's one way that they come into my orbit. A lot of people aren't necessarily aware that they need to grow people. They're
Mhm.
just very aware of the pain points they're having. They're aware of the frustrations. They're aware of the mismanagement. They're aware of the constantly, like, I had someone the other day say, I've just hired and fired my 3rd COO in 5 years. What the F am I doing wrong? And when I sat down with him for 5 or 6 minutes, he's like, God, I can't believe I've missed this. Like, so they know they're doing something
What
wrong,
was
but
it? What was it that he was doing wrong?
he had never identified what his strengths were and what his weaknesses were. And he'd never identified what areas of the business were non-negotiable that he wanted to continue running. And he kept hiring people that wanted to run parts of the business he wanted. And then he kept meddling. So part two was he kept meddling in their area of the business. What he needed to do is hire someone really strong at his weaknesses
Mm.
and get the heck out of their way and make sure that he hired somebody that he trusted implicitly, which meant understanding the interviewing and the recruiting and the onboarding and the reference check process so that you know everything about them before day one, so that when they start, you don't need to meddle. And then part three was having the right systems in place to have date night and stay in communication and stay in trust with each other. So it was kind of the combination of those three things.
That makes sense. So one of the things that I find my people have trouble is keeping the pulse on the organization. The higher they go in
Mhm.
the organization, the harder they have keeping track of things.
Yeah.
Both practical with a dashboard, but also the people thing. And on your cadence with meetings and keeping in touch seems really fascinating.
You know, one of the parts of my cadence that is something that I've always looked at is driving a car. So I'll give you an example. What kind of car do you drive?
I have a Chevy Blazer.
Okay. So in your Chevy Blazer, you have a dashboard on the front of your Chevy Blazer, and there's a bunch of metrics and dials on your dashboard. There's data on your dashboard. What's the biggest dial or data point on your dashboard?
The speedometer.
The speedometer, right? It's the biggest one because it's the most important metric. Now you've got another metric, and you probably look at that like constantly while you're driving. Like you glance at it on and off. Newer cars now actually have like a little feature, and it tells you when you're going more than 10 miles over the speed limit, so we can slow down and we don't. It's kind of got like a little part in the metric that says, "Hey, you're going too fast, or you're below the goal." Right? It lights up on the dashboard. There's another metric in the bottom right-hand corner of your dashboard that you rarely look at. You might look at once or twice a week, but it lights up orange or red every once in a while. What's that one?
The gas.
The gas, right? Now you only look at it once or twice a week because, oh, I got 3/4 of a tank. You don't even need to think about it, but it lights up orange and goes, hey, motherfucker, go pull your car over. You're running out of gas. The problem with most leaders' dashboards, if they have 80 things on them, they're all the same size, and they don't really tell us how we're doing against anything, against any goal. So they all blend together. Now, when you go to your car dealership, especially if you drive a high performance vehicle like a Ferrari or a Porsche, you go to the dealership, they plug it in and they've got the car computer and there's 1,000 data points. The last thing the car owner wants is all 1,000 data points on their dashboard. We just need to know if there's a problem with the oil, right? So the most leaders need is the core metrics in front of them, maybe 12 or 15 metrics maximum.
Mm-hmm.
And those metrics have to show whether they're red, yellow, or green. And if they're orange or if they're yellow or red, then you might go meet with the business area and say, show me your 20 metrics. I only want to see your 3 core ones. But if 2 or 3 of yours are orange or yellow or red, I want you to open up your dashboard and show me all 20 that you're measuring. And I want to take a look at them with you.
What tools do you use?
Then, and then yeah, the last part is we need to show people how often do you look at the metrics, right? Because one metric maybe you look at every week, one metric maybe you look at every hour. And then what do you do if they're red, yellow, or green? So the problem is that people have dashboards or data, but they're not sure what to do it. They're not sure who's looking at it. They're not sure how often to even look at it, and it all looks the same.
Right. So which tools do you use?
Well, I start off by actually just using basic Excel. The reality is, like, if you can't manage your business with your goals being written on a post-it note and your basic data being in Excel, it's not about displaying them using something like, you know, some amazing dashboard software. You don't need to have amazing software. You need to have the understanding that you need the proper data. You could have the best software in the world displaying all of your data for you, but if you've got 80 data points and they're all the same size and they don't show up as red, yellow, or green, it doesn't matter. Or you could even have them displayed using the best data and the best software that exists. But if no one's responsible, or 3 people are responsible for it, then nobody's responsible. I've had that happen before as well. Like, who's responsible for customer net promoter score? Oh, well, Bob and Kelly. Well, guess what? If 2 people are responsible, no one's responsible. Pick one person. So it's more about it's more about that than it is about where to display it. Right.
Makes perfect sense. So we talk about the keeping track of the business part, and what I love about your work is that you look at support also, caring about the human beings. How do you keep in touch? How do you have your leaders keep in touch with the organization, and how morale is doing, how people's burnout is doing? How do you do that?
Yeah, so the first one is that we manage the employee net promoter score as the #1 metric in every company. More important than profit, more important than revenue, more important than your
Mm.
customer happiness, customer net promoter score is what's your employee net promoter score? So every 3 to 6 months, we ask one question to all of our employees. On a scale of 1 to 10, how enthusiastically would you recommend this as a place to work? We take the percentage of people that give us a 9 or 10, those are promoters, subtract the percentage of people that give us a 1 through 6, those are the detractors, and we end up with a result of somewhere between negative 100% and positive 100%. The goal is to get your company towards 70 or 80% positive net promoter score. The net promoter score agency says 50 or better is world class. I'm about building like best, right? Like I coached the #2 company in the United States on Glassdoor, the number 12 on Glassdoor, 4 or 5 companies that want to become #1 in their country to work for. Those are companies that are obsessing about getting their employee net promoter score at positive 90 or 95 or greater.
Mhm.
That's the #1. The #2 question I ask on the survey on the thank you page is, what's one thing we can do to have you give us an even better rating the next time we ask the question? We take all of those answers, we take the most frequently responded answers, and we go back to the employees and say, hey, we are listening in the survey. Here's something you asked for. We're putting it in place. And we tell the whole company, right? Even if only 6 people asked for something, we say, here's something we heard in the survey. We're doing it. And they go, wow, at least you're listening to us as a team versus just the one person who might have made the suggestion. But that's basically the #1 thing we do. The reason we focus on employee net promoter score first as the general pulse is if we push too hard on the customer, obsessing about the customer, customer's always right. Let's drive hard for the customer, make the customer happy. The employees feel burned out. They feel stressed. They feel overworked. They feel overwhelmed. But if we care and obsess about our employees and they're so damn happy and we care about them as humans, we care about their personal lives, we care about what's going on day to day, they'll go through brick walls for us to build the company, which means we have happy customers, which means we can charge more and make more.
The first place I really heard that in earnest was from Gary Ridge, who was the former CEO of WD-40. And
Okay.
when you look at the scores and the enthusiasm for people who work for a company that sells grease that makes things not squeak, right? It tells you it really doesn't matter what you're doing; it's how you're doing it and who you're doing it with that matters. And it makes
Herb
it.
Kelleher, same thing from Southwest Airlines. Herb Kelleher was our employees are #1, our customers #2. They had a customer one time that called up and said, if you don't stop telling jokes on the airline, I'm not going to fly with you. Herb's response was, we'll miss you because we're going to keep telling jokes.
Hilarious. So we're going to put all kinds of links for people to see more of you. Can you just tell a little bit about your program? Because it seems really thorough to me.
Sure. So the Invest in Your Leaders course is the 12 core skills that I've worked hard at globally, training CEOs, COOs, anybody who manages people, and all the clients that I've coached. Companies pay me $80,000 a year to coach them. To put somebody through the course is only $700 to get them through all 12 modules. So it's a rounding error in terms of money. The skills are ranked in the order that I like people to learn them. And the way I suggest people go through it, because it only takes about 6 hours total to go through all 12 modules. It's me teaching the content on video. Then there's some written information they can read. And each module has a pre-test that the person's going to fail for sure, which then sets the gap and shows them they want to learn. And then there's a post-test at the end. After they complete going through all 12 modules, they go through all 12 post-tests. They also get a certification badge saying that they're certified as leaders, and it is a certification badge they can place on LinkedIn. But that's how the program is. I like people to go through 2 modules together over the course of a week. So let's say you have let's say 6 or 7 managers going through the course. They go through module 1 and 2 in week 1. Have them meet up for lunch over Zoom or in person on Monday and talk for 5 minutes each, almost like a 5-minute book report. What did you learn from those 2 modules? And what are you putting in place for those 2 modules? Have each person do that. And then in week 2, do modules 3 and 4. Week 3, do modules 4 or 5 and 6, etc. And then what I like to do at the end of the next quarter is have them go through the content again. Have them over the course of a year go through all 12 modules 2 or 3 times. Because as I talk about in the classroom training module, there's something that happens with learners when they're learning content, practicing content, thinking about their learning. They go through a cycle, and going through it again after they've practiced it and tried it is going to reinforce some of what they didn't catch the first time around.
Last question. Your enthusiasm for what you do
Hmm.
seems to be at the same level as when you started. You just seem on fire for helping people be successful and be successful in a sustainable fashion. Tell me about that. What keeps you going and doing this?
I was told for 18 years by a school system that I was stupid and wouldn't be successful unless I could focus and pay attention and study harder. I tried, I focused, I studied harder, and I've proven that I'm successful in a different world. And I think there's a lot of entrepreneurs out there that struggled in a similar way, and they feel like they're going to keep trying harder and keep working harder. And that's what my school system taught me. Try harder, try harder. They taught me to be a fly and bang my head on the window, and there's a shortcut. And I'm kind of wanting to help all these entrepreneurs to say, you don't need an MBA. You don't need a formal education. You don't need to have this big fancy whatever. You need the shortcuts. You need the cheat sheets. And one of those is grow your people. I was asked by Fortune magazine in 2003, how do you hold your people accountable? I said, I don't. I hire accountable people. I give them the skills and the confidence to do their job, and I support them, and I get out of their way. And that's kind of what I'm trying to do with the Invest in Your Leaders course, and then with, all the content I give away on YouTube and everywhere else.
That's the best way I could ever hope for you to answer. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
People want
Thank
people
you.
want to find you. Where do they find you?
Yeah, if they go to CameronHerold.com, and it's Herold, CameronHerold.com has all of my information for all my different programs. Invest in Your Leaders is investinyourleaders.com. And then all 6 of my books are on Amazon. Second in Command podcast, they can check that out. And then I have a ton of free systems on my YouTube channel, the Cameron Herold YouTube channel.
Yeah, I spent a bunch of time on those videos and just feverishly wrote notes. So really informative, really good. Thank you for doing this, Cameron.
Of course, Mark, you're really welcome.
To everybody else, I appreciate your time and attention more than you know. I love you. Have a great rest of the day. Boom.